We've all said it at some point. I'm just a creature of habit. And sure, there's a lot to say for consistency and routine. But what about that other aphorism? The only constant in life is change. Maybe we're creatures of change too. In this podcast, we'll explore change from a variety of perspectives. Stories of people who've made huge changes in the trajectory of their lives, others who've made small but lasting and impactful changes in their day-to-day lives. And we'll also just nerd out about the science of human behavior and how we can get better at executing the small changes and embracing the big ones. I'm Valerie Martin, and you're listening to Creatures of Change. Hello, friends, and welcome back to Creatures of Change. I am really excited for this conversation. Our guest today, Melanie, who, if you're watching on YouTube, you can already see her beautiful face. She and I used to share office space, and it's funny when you're solo therapist practitioners kind of like sharing a suite like we were, because you could be in the same space like most days of the week and hardly ever see the other person. So yeah, so we didn't actually get to see each other a lot, but in passing, it's nice to know that you're not alone and to have colleagues that you can check in with. And now Melanie is in a different space and I'm in a different space, and you're going to hear more about what she's doing professionally. But this is also just a conversation about change as a human, because Melanie's been through a lot of change in the past couple of years. So that'll be really fun for us to get into. Before we jump into that and I share her bio, just wanted to let people know that I know some of you listening are local to Nashville, some of you are not. So if you are local, we have some groups here at the Gaia Center that are starting or happening. Check those out on our website. All of those links are in the intro and outro, so I won't repeat them here. But really, really love our new group space here. So I feel very excited about that. What else am I excited about? I've got a trip coming up to St. Louis to visit my mom, where she just moved near the city. We're going to see Hadestown. Super excited for that. And had friends over this past weekend too, and ended up doing like 2.5 hours of karaoke. So if you have not karaoke in a while, let me just highly recommend it. Yeah, I don't think there's a lot I want to share for the time being. So I'm sure I'll come up with things and throw a solo episode together. But let's get into the conversation. So Melanie Reese is a board certified psychotherapist and owner of Trauma Therapy of Nashville, private practice specializing in holistic trauma healing. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist, certified clinical trauma professional, certified brain spotting practitioner. Melanie and her team specialize in treating trauma, women's issues, relationships, and chronic pain and illness. Melanie's background in mind and body give her a unique and effective approach to therapy. She works from a neuro-experiential perspective, using brain spotting, EMDR, mindfulness, somatics, body movement, all the things that we'll talk some about today, and is also an AAMFT approved supervisor. So I'm just so excited to see you.
You too.
Great.
Love it.
So yeah. And one of the things that, I mean, we talked a little bit about this before pressing record, but I would love to just get into that in terms of change. You had a big change happen right before COVID, where, I mentioned that we were in this shared suite. So like, for people who don't know our little world, it's like one person is on the lease and the rest of us just, write them a check every month. Very low commitment, low risk kind of thing overall. And then you and our friend and colleague Leah were like, we're going to go and we're going to lease the entire building across the street, like months before the pandemic and everything was online for a year. So, and you've made it work. Like, you're still there. You're still in the building. You've even taken over more of the building within your own growing practice. But yeah, I would love to just kind of hear, like, what that was like. I mean, I've had a similar change in terms of, growing from the little space to taking on this like additional risk and opportunity, but that was such a huge change. And right before the pandemic, I'm curious like what that was like to weather.
Leah and I joke that we have like PTSD from that experience.
I bet.
There were times where we truly are best friends, but we're business partners. And that is like a marriage. And we seriously thought about going to see a therapist together.
Yes.
So we could, because we both were dedicated to working it out, but we both just kind of had this dream of a space that had different holistic practitioners. And so, we kind of were just trying to follow flow and saw that happen. And we didn't have anyone, signed on. I was like, I don't know if anybody's going to understand the idea of like a collective place. But hopefully people recognize or resonate with it. And they did. And then we spent months getting it all ready to go. And then the pandemic happened. I think we moved in November, and then March was the shutdown. There was a lot of panic, but it actually turned out really well. It gave us a chance to renegotiate a lease. So we dropped down to only 2 floors, and now we have the 3rd floor back because of the growth that's happened. But I mean, I'm still thankful. I don't know if I would willingly choose to like take on something in the way we took that on before, but we've learned like so many lessons from it, how to get along with people, and how to think through things. And I think we're smart business wise and human wise because of it. And so it's something we're still doing just because it still works.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, it reminds me of kind of the approach that, one of my favorite modalities, ACT, takes. It's like, if it works, great. If it doesn't, like, don't do it. It's like the idea of, stop having that thought. If that worked, I would do it, but it doesn't work. So yeah, it's like, keep doing something while it's working, and then be willing to be flexible and adaptive.
Yeah. I think there was a big turning point learning when that got the height of that being really stressful and like not knowing what to do, was I think the fact that I learned to let go of an outcome. And I think that is a big, huge lesson that has contributed to the way I've moved through changes, whether it was just a change that happened or one I tried to create, was letting go of the outcome. I learned a skill to notice when I felt like I was trying to make something happen instead of flowing with the thing that was happening, and navigating with it that way. So that was a big lesson that I think that whole experience of taking on that space and hiring people, so I still notice it. And so as the group practice started, it's something I have to continually pay attention to, of where am I trying to make something happen, versus when am I just going with it.
Yeah. Okay. So for anybody listening who's like, well, that sounds great, Melanie, but how am I supposed to just let go because I have to pay these bills, or I have to I'm an entrepreneur, or I'm trying to do this thing and it's not going to just happen. Right. So how do you sort of nuance that?
Yeah. I think I definitely was in that place for a long time. I'm like, yeah, all this sounds really great, but I do have bills to pay. And we were pulling from our personal pockets at that point. And the only thing I can say to that is it's not just don't try.
Yeah.
Sometimes we hear letting go of outcome or let it happen means not trying. And that's really not it at all. It's looking at just trying is showing up. And like to me, what that looked like in that situation was we didn't just give up and let it go and go into all kinds of debt and things like that. We sought out like business advisors and kind of create a plan. We reached out to like the landlord and was like, can we renegotiate this, or what can happen? Can we get a reduction on our rent? So that's what showing up in what's happening looks like, versus feeling like you don't have a sense of choice in that.
Exactly. And I think that's such a key distinction, right? And that I always come back to for myself, for my clients is this idea of, yeah, there's a hell of a lot we don't have control over.
Yeah.
Where do I have agency here? I
Yes.
have agency to reach out to the landlord. I have agency to hire, to seek expert consultation, right? Like there are these things that I can show up for really proactively. And then there's a lot of this that I do have to like, I can't even steer because it's just not within my control.
Yeah. And I'm a 6 on the Enneagram. And so it's like I think it is a skill, and I've learned to use it in a positive way or productive way for myself. But, I have a tendency, I'm going to plan about 10 steps out with some. And I think through whether it was the business stuff or all the other things that changed that happened, I think another lesson I learned was that it wasn't, I was spending a lot of energy trying to predict and plan for where it could all go wrong to try to prevent
Mm,
it from going wrong. I failed to recognize all the things I'd been through even prior to that point that helped me. I gained confidence in knowing I know how to show up when it does go wrong,
hmm.
that I don't have to spend the energy planning for it to go wrong, because then I narrow the possibility of it actually going right if I
Yeah.
just always anticipating it to go wrong.
Right.
Learn
Right.
a balance in that, because it's still helpful to be aware and know things so that it has the best chance of going smoothly. But I
Yeah.
was really focusing a lot of attention on where everything was going to go wrong to try to get safety. That's your 6
Yeah.
for you. Um,
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that like almost kind of knowing your natural tendencies and that those aren't bad, you don't need to be a different person, but
right.
that sometimes even where those can be strengths, they also have their potential shadow. So we kind of have to bring them into check. Whereas, someone who's maybe more opposite, who's the 7 like me, who's like, let's do it. It's like I sometimes do benefit from thinking through, well, what could happen here? Like, what are the potential liabilities that I at least need to consider?
Yes.
And so both, like knowing, am I someone who leans too much into that? Am I someone who doesn't? And then the thing I thought of when you were talking too is like, as Marie Forleo says in the name of her book, everything is figure outable. And just knowing that
Yes.
whatever does happen,
Mhm.
like, yeah, I'll cross that bridge. I trust in my own internal and external resources to
Yeah,
figure it out.
absolutely. Yeah. And it lets you detach from that idea of there's a certain outcome to happen. It's
Hmm.
when we can do that, we can stay more present moment, we can enjoy it more, but we can come up with solutions and ideas more when we're more in that present instead of worrying about what could go wrong, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Balance.
So I am so curious to know about some of the like internal shifts and changes that you've experienced. I mean, even since the last time that we've really connected in the past couple of years, it sounds like you've had some shifts in your religious views, your political views, and we think of those sometimes as much as, I wish it would be otherwise, we think of those as these like immutable unchangeable things, like this is what I stand for, this is what I believe in. And that's, people then can get their heels dug in and not be open to different perspectives or going,
Mhm.
oh, maybe I don't agree with that anymore, maybe that doesn't resonate. So
Mhm.
how did that process even start?
Oh, where did it start? I would say Leah suggested that a book to me called The
Mm.
Surrender Experiment. Um,
Is that
and
Michael Singer?
mhm,
Yeah.
yeah, and I feel like that was a huge thing that made me like think, oh, there's a different way to maybe go about thinking about things or doing things, that
Mm.
because that control thing is kind of surrendering to life and what gets put in front of you. But it also, I think, as far as the spirituality shift, he's a meditator, and in his book he has this huge meditation center, and he was talking about people that were all coming to this center, and he was naming different religions of people showing up, including Christians, which was what I identified with at the time, and was like, oh, like, this is all, it's just, I kind of came out of that reading that book with, there's so many different paths, and
Mm.
there's like, for me, my belief now is there's one God, higher power, you know, universe, whatever.
Source. Yeah.
Yes, whatever feels right, but it's however, how do you connect to it? And that's really the point, that
Mm.
there's not a certain way that's right or wrong. Christianity was the way I was introduced to it, because I lived in the South and I live in America, and so that was a good probability. That's how I came across it. It I it didn't fit for me. It wasn't the best way for me to try to connect to myself in this, you know, higher power source
Mm-hmm.
that I felt I knew was there, because just with my experience there, I asked my pastor at the time to go have coffee with
Mm-hmm.
me and let me ask him some questions,
Ooh.
because what I started seeing in the work I do as a therapist, lots of LGBTQ, um, asking or having questions and working with them around, like, just the trauma that's happened as far as
Mm-hmm.
religious abuse or trauma. And it just broke my heart. And I was like, I'm a part of this system that is
Mm-hmm.
causing a lot of this pain and harm. And so I asked my pastor, because it just got
Yeah.
to a point not, I couldn't sum it up with, like, it's people and not, it's the people are causing the harm. It's not God.
Right.
I was like, well, there's just an extreme amount of people doing this.
And
So,
systems that are very powerful.
yes. And so that's where I was like, I want to question and get some answers on this. And so we sat down and I kind of just was like, I know what the Bible says. And I know, the stance a lot of times with churches around this, but I need to know, what do you think about, you know, gay people in church? Because we hear a lot of messages with churches that
Mm-hmm.
everyone's welcome, but they're not allowed to even serve the community
Right.
or to
So
be
that's,
a
are
part of
they?
it. Yeah. And so when I asked him that question, he gave me kind of, I could tell, just a church answer. And
Mm-hmm.
I said, thanks for sharing the church answer. I want to know yours. If you're
Mm-hmm.
going to lead me spiritually, I want to know where you stand on this. And, he was really honest, and he was like, I'm kind of intimidated in
Mm.
this conversation, because I know
Yeah.
there's an answer you want to hear, and he wants to be able to give it to me. And he's like, I look for, I could tell it was something he wanted to consolidate for himself, but
Mm-hmm.
that's just not where he was. And
Work he hadn't done. Yeah.
yeah. And well, and that's, I'm not to say his experience and thoughts are inaccurate, but it just didn't align anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that kind of added to, like, I'm not sure that this fits, with how I can engage with the world and people. And that book and conversations, that I like surrounding myself with people that think differently than me, so that it allows an expansion of my thinking, and for change to occur.
Mm-hmm.
If I surrounded myself with people that all thought did the same as me, it'd be pretty boring. um, and so that kind of led to the spiritual shift there, with that change, is just kind of giving myself permission that
Yeah.
I could, like, let's try on some different ways of thinking and see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
And so making a shift, and it was hard to let go of that I don't know, I don't want to call it a title, but that
Mm.
label of
Like
Christian.
identity. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I was like, oh, what does that mean now?
Mm-hmm.
I had to figure that out. And then after about 6 or 8 months of, um, exploring that, then I started to, like, that was just all of my clients. And I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if you experienced that, but it tends, you get things put in front of you that you're learning just as well.
Right.
So I offered a group. I was like, it's an exploration group. It's not about
Mm-hmm.
anything,
Not
negative
about
or
having answers.
right. And I was like, I'm about 8 months ahead of you guys that might be just starting. starting this. I was like, but we're going to explore it. And I think that helped more. I tend to, when I notice something, I'm like, okay, I dig into it and
Right.
like
We
figure this
teach
out.
what we need to learn and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of where I think it
Mhm.
started was with
Yeah. Yeah. And, in hearing a lot of people's experiences of like deconstructing and just deconverting and all of that, it's everyone's, there's a lot of universalities of things that people experience and relate to, and that it can feel so healing to be with others who've been through that. And there's a lot of aspects that can be very different from person to person because there's so much variability in terms of what did someone's upbringing look like with religion or their family, or how much of their world is wrapped into that. And so it's always a challenge. It's always something that can provide or can create a lot of sort of disruption or internal, external, like disorienting.
Mhm.
But then, yeah, there are certain times where it's somebody's entire world has had to turn upside down just for them to really be able to have that permission to really challenge some of the ideas that they had been handed or had taken as truth.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. And I think I started asking myself, what I just started checking, like kind of questioning everything in a good way. You
Yeah,
know, as I'll tell my clients, I'm like, question every thought you have or
right.
decision
Don't
you make,
believe everything you think. Absolutely.
but like start checking in with like, why am I doing things this way? And what I
Mm,
started finding was like, it was just something that just, I didn't really think twice. It was what I was introduced to or taught,
yeah.
and just thought, well, this is it. But it wasn't
Mhm.
ever, I was like, I'm going to explore this, because if I do and decide how I've been doing it's the best way for me, then I've made it for me
Mhm.
versus because of anything else. And so I just started just checking with everything I was doing, and like, why do I feel like this is done this way? It's
Mhm.
changed the way that I do therapy as a trauma therapist. I'm like, who said 50 minutes once a week is the way we're supposed to do therapy? Insurance
Mhm.
companies. I don't take insurance, and I don't do talk therapy. I do trauma work, and it's hard to get stuff done in 50 minutes. So I'm like, I'm going to start doing intensive work to do just trauma
Mhm.
work. I don't have to be the primary therapist for everybody.
Yep.
I can just work with them on this. It's what I like doing. And the more I connected to what I'm passionate about and what I love,
Yeah.
I mean, I enjoyed my work before, but going through a pandemic as a trauma therapist, you really, really you can get burned out. I did.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
took a month off in January to try to reset and like, what do I really want to be doing?
Mm.
And now work doesn't really feel like work anymore. It's fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm thinking of something that one of my friend tours says. Actually, her interview will probably be airing right before this one.
Mhm.
Jenny Blake, and especially during COVID, but even before that, she was talking about radical reimagining. Everything is up for grabs, right?
Yeah.
If we allow ourselves to question every assumption, where
Yeah.
might we land? What might our jobs look like? What might our lives look like? What might our beliefs look like?
Yeah.
So it sounds like kind of opening that door
Yeah.
allowed you to start, really holding everything and going, how
Hmm.
does this fit for me now? And if it doesn't, or some of it doesn't, what
Hmm.
can I do about that?
Right. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Mm,
Yeah. I
cool.
think knowing you have the possibility or the opportunity, and that it's okay, giving yourself the permission just to think differently, and,
Hmm.
and try to understand yourself more, I think.
Cool.
Yeah.
One book I want to plug. I mean, and I feel like so much of this is it's there's a lot of energy around all of this with spirituality and religion, especially. I think people talking about it more on social media. Like it's awesome that these ideas are becoming more widespread. More people are finding avenues to give themselves that permission.
Mm.
um, but also these wonderful books have always been out there. We just can find them better now because we share things with each other on the internet and on podcasts and all of that. There's this rabbi who's based in Murfreesboro, um, and his name is Rabbi Rami Shapiro. He teaches at, I think, MTSU, maybe somewhere, I can't remember, but and he's also written a number of books, and he really is an embodiment of what's called perennial philosophy, of sort of like you were saying earlier, of like all of these religions is pointing to the same thing, right? Like we learned that the Jesus story was like, oh, there's a lot of religions that have a very similar story. Like turns out this, even if some of this historically did happen, it's not the only time this has happened. It's not the only figure, preaching truth, quote unquote. So he has a great book called Perennial Philosophy, Wisdom for the Spiritually Independent, I think is the title. I'll put it in the show notes. But I love that idea of spiritually independent. Like I can pull from these traditions. I can, honor them without necessarily having to identify with anyone, and, practice that independent, curious thinking.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would not put a label on myself besides I'm just spiritual and me.
I'm me. Yep. Love it.
I think the way we define spirituality, we automatically hear religion, or we try to put it in a context, but it's really just, it's an action. I see spirituality as, how do you connect to yourself and anything beyond you? It's a practice, and not a label. And I tell clients this, but I try to really follow it myself. Anything that says it knows you better than you, person, any religion, any government, anything, go the other way. Even I'm like, if I ever say anything to a client, I tell them, if I ever say anything that feels like I'm knowing you more than you do, question me, call me out, say it. Like, I don't know you more than you know you. I have to be careful with all of my prior experiences of my own and with clients to not assume that I know you. And so I kind of like approach my therapy work with that idea of like, I don't know what's going to help this person heal. My job is just to show up and help them connect to what their natural ability to heal themselves. Otherwise, I'm being just as oppressive as other systems in their life. If I say, I know
this is the truth, this is what's healthy, this is what you should do.
And that's a huge part of how I started showing up for myself, and then being able to offer that, and just everything I do really has been.
I love that. So one thing, that an angle of this that I'm kind of curious about in your own story is like, like I said earlier, there are a lot of good reasons why it's very scary to think of changing some of these really core things that, really we feel like kind of shape our identity, who we are, how we see the world. And that, especially for some people in their individual situations, the stakes are high, like the risks are high. They know that if I were to question X, if I were to change X, whether it's their beliefs, their sexual orientation, their whatever, there would be a price to pay. And that big sidebar reminds me of a great quote I heard in Ryan Holiday's podcast yesterday of principles. Something, it's not a principle until it costs you money. And I mean, it doesn't always have to be literal money, but like there's a price to pay sometimes for having your principles. And so I think about like when you made this shift for yourself, it's not always just like everyone in our life is like, good for you, I'm so happy for you that you're evolving in this way, right? Like sometimes it costs us things, and I'm curious like what that was like for you.
Yes, there are costs. I like that phrasing of it's a principle once there's a cost. Because I like that. And there definitely has been with shifting. I didn't kind of come out to family as non-Christian for a very long time, because my family, they're very Christian and from the South, and I had to do a lot of internal work, because I think when the shift first happened, when I would hear "I'm praying for you," I would cringe and get mad, like angry inside. I'm like, ugh. One, because I felt like they didn't really know me, and I received it as judgment. As I did more work internally to know what all that looked like for me, I could receive "I'm praying for you" as a love offering. Oh, this is how they show love and care or support for other people. It's not how I do say, I don't use that phrase, but I could receive it as that. And then my father passed away in February, and that kind of forced some things to come out. And I had family that no longer speak to me because of that. I'm sure there's other things, and so right now the work is for me to learn how to forgive that, and to let go and not hold on to judgment. So there is loss, and that can make you, when it's someone close to you, it can be hard, I think, to stand firm in what you're feeling and thinking, because you just want to make it okay, especially when there's other things beyond your belief system, being questioned going on. And so, yeah, I think there's a loss in connection that way when I look at it as some being closed off. And I think some of the mentality in different religions, not just Christian, is that there's that only that one way is right. And I think I've learned to sum it up as, I remember talking to my sister, she's a pastor's wife, and about this at the beginning, and she was like, "Melanie, we want to know that you're okay when you die." And at the time I got really fresh. I was like, "Do you realize what you're saying? And you need me to be a certain way." And I said that to her. But as I have processed and looked at that and thought through that more, it's coming out of fear and love for me, her wanting that. And she's experiencing the conversation in me and everything through her belief system. And I love my sister, and I know she loves me, and we're fine. We still talk and are fine. But it's really hard. And I think that I could have just kind of pushed everybody away that didn't want, that had an issue with me. But staying in relationship, like talking with my sister and other, friends that are Christian, it allows me to practice what I feel like I believe now, is that there's no right or wrong way. And I'm really just trying to understand myself and other people. So it's still loss and grief to be, worked through. But yeah, that was a big loss of that.
Yeah. And as, of course, you're experiencing personally, we've, walked alongside a lot of people navigating what do these relationships look like when there's this thing here that may never be resolved. We may never agree. We may never, like, it's just always going to be there. That there are cases where, the loving thing for self is to disconnect, but there are cases where that's not necessary. Like you're saying, like, there can be some messiness and some unresolved stuff, and we can still love one another. Sometimes we have to love one another at different distances, depending on what's going on and if someone is actively harming us. But yeah, I think that there is one I feel like I talk about a lot, that some of what I see in this overly reductionistic social media therapy landscape is, all this language around toxic this and, like just totally cutting out people because they're toxic. And it's like, yeah, okay, sometimes a firm line is just what's needed. But many times there's room to be in the messiness together and to be able to be around people who don't share our same beliefs and perspectives.
Mhm. I think we need that, you
Mhm.
know? I think that's the issue. If we surround ourselves with people that think, do, and act as we do, we cut ourselves off from a lot of beautiful things.
Mhm. Yeah. So one of the things I'm curious about too, from your story, I know that you've struggled with like the chronic pain and illness stuff. And it sounds like there's been a change in how you're approaching that and how you're experiencing that, which I'm sure then, again, you're not saying that your clients are having the same experience as you, but it also brings you different tools and options to offer as ideas for clients who are struggling with those issues. So I'm curious kind of what's changed in your journey with chronic pain or chronic illness.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question, and definitely something that has changed for the good in some ways. There's been other things that have been introduced that I'm dealing with. But
Mm,
I'm more holistic now. There was
mm.
a good while starting in college until I would say about 5 years ago, where I would have a surgery almost every year for something.
Wow.
Like,
Yeah.
insurance would get maxed out to where it was paying 100% for everything. And by the end of the year, and I was just like, something, I got to do something different. And
Mm,
I was on just a handful of medications for I have chronic migraine, I have kidney stones, I have
mhm.
endometriosis, I have diverticulitis. I've had surgeries for all of those things, sinus surgery, like all those kinds of things. And I'm I more take supplements. Now I go to more holistic providers. I do sound healing, energy
Mm,
work. Psychedelics has been a thing that I have,
mhm,
you know, was I was very skeptical of, and then that became a part of our a curiosity.
mhm,
And then read, you know, research and materials and books on it, and then decided to try it. And that has been a huge shift in the way that I experience my body
mm,
and approach healing as well. Um, and so lots of more holistic in healing my trauma. And that's
mhm,
why it may be weird sometimes to hear a therapist, mental health therapist works with chronic illness in the body, but if you're a holistic provider, you know that those things are not separate, but
right.
we tend to keep them separate. But most a lot of our chronic illness is trauma and stress
Mhm,
induced. And that's at the point where I am right now with my body is very stressed right now. And so trying to do a lot of work around because I mentally, I don't necessarily feel stressed, but my body is in a hyper arousal.
mm,
It's
mhm,
very inflamed. I've gained like 20 pounds in the past year,
mm,
probably. And my joints hurt, like my hands hurt, my ankles and feet hurt. My energy's low, and it's all a lot of stress and burnout. And so doing
mm,
a lot of clearing out of
mhm,
my life, things that are stressful, and going back to that, making things happen. Like when I try to notice it when I'm making
mm.
something happen versus going,
Tension and yeah.
yes. So I try to recognize really in my body um, what that feels like, because most people will tell you they experience me as a very calm person, very
Mm,
like grounded type of energy, and I am, but internally there are times where I'm very stressed, but
mm,
it doesn't come out as that. Leah's like, you're
mhm.
very good at containing your anxiety. And not kind of dishing it out to people. But I didn't recognize that I was doing that.
Right.
And then so the work at that point, once I kind of started clicking and realizing some things that were happening, I'm like, oh, now here's some other tools. And so I did a sound bath for the first time. Towards the beginning of the pandemic, Allison Osherman, who now is in our, like, does some stuff in our office, works from our office, is a sound therapist. And I came across her on Instagram, and she has this lovely, beautiful, blonde, naturally curly hair.
Mm,
And that caught my attention. And I was like, who's this person? And so I looked, I
Mhm.
was like, what is sound therapy? And I
Mhm.
reached out to her and was like, tell me what you do. Tell me about this. And she came and did a sound bath for the therapist in our office. And I had a Kundalini awakening.
Wow.
And I had no idea what that word even was at the
Mm.
time.
Mhm.
I was like, but it was very intense. There was some trauma release that happened, and that's not typical
Mm.
for a sound bath. But I
Mhm.
think I was just really open to the
Mm.
experience and just like, I don't know what this is supposed to, what this is supposed to feel like or happen. And then I was now aware of like, I remember thinking, this is some energy stuff, what I always thought was anxiety.
There was
Some
an
energy.
excess of like energy kind of built up that needed to have a
Mhm.
channel to move through.
Yeah. And I
Mm.
mean, I had known like what's chakras, I've
Mhm.
known that, but didn't really get into that or meditation or just energy and stuff. I thought it was a good idea, but didn't really engage with it much. And after that experience, it was like I was then aware of something I wasn't before. And I knew I had to figure out what that meant for me.
Mm. Mm.
And it started, I had a relationship over during last year that really was a wonderful experience in helping me explore those things. They were
Mm.
like-minded in that sense and further along in their meditation practice and those types of things. And so that allowed me to engage with it more and explore it more. Psychedelics, I was
Mhm.
experienced that for the first time in that relationship. And I think that was a huge purpose of that relationship, was to help me grow and expand in
Mm.
that way, because now it is a huge part of the work I do, in
Mhm.
helping others heal. Meditation is is a practice in a way that I can show up and check in with what I need. It's a way for
Mhm.
me to practice what I ask clients to do. They come into session and I say, "What do you need today?" And if they're like, "I don't know," most learn they come in knowing what they want to work on. But when they don't know, I'm like, "Okay, well let's figure that out."
Yep.
And I'm going to lead them into a meditation and kind of pose that question and just say, "Let's see what comes up."
Mhm.
If I give them the answers and tell them things, they have that enough out
Right.
in the world. And so the more I learn and practice and do that for this myself, the more I can help others connect and know that for
Mhm.
themselves too. So that all has just been a huge shift in learning experience
Yeah.
in the way that I continue to learn and deepen my work
Mhm.
internally and show up with others too.
Mm. And I imagine you can tell me if you disagree with this, but it's like, Western medicine, medication, surgery, all that is not mutually exclusive with some of these other modalities, right? Like so often people need a combination of both.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, right. And so I think that's like, again, like we're talking about kind of the polarization. And when people like just dig their heels into their perspective, they lose that possibility to be fluid and flexible and open. And that includes like being really strong in either polarity of like big pharma is evil and psychiatric medications never work and they're just people are just trying to find an easy solution and people
Mhm.
will put you on as many meds as you want, whatever, versus like, looking at that as like the be all end all and that I'm not willing to try anything that my primary care doctor is not going to give me. So
Right.
it's I think it's tricky because I'm very much a believer in that sort of integrative approach of let's look at all our options, let's use what works.
Mhm.
If it's not working, let's explore what else or how the different things can be complementary. um and it's tricky because sometimes I do see in the sort of wellness sphere, I mean, that's been something I've talked about in different spaces, that
Mhm.
especially during the pandemic and seeing how some of the wellness people responded with vaccines and COVID and like all of that, it really freaked me out. And I started to like have a little new agey deconversion. And so now it's like part of that work is like going, okay, well, I don't have to throw that baby out with the bathwater either. Like there's still some validity and obviously, people experience benefit from something. I'm not going to tell them they're not. And I'm also like, can we please remember science? Can we please, have these things work together?
Yeah, definitely. And it's, again, we put ourselves in that polarity mentality that it has to be one or the other, and that we don't have to know for anyone besides ourselves. No one can know. And I think that was a big shift for me, is in in a lot of stuff, but especially with the health stuff or just change in general. I'm the only one capable of that for myself, and to knowing, we forget doctors work for us. Those surgeries, I needed those. I wouldn't have gone to, a chiropractor or
Yeah,
acupuncturist to try to heal some of those things. Those can help with symptoms.
sure.
I'm all about being a trauma therapist. I'm all about our nervous system. So I'm going to bring in and use things that a calm, regulated nervous system, you're putting your body in the best place for healing. And so surgery can work, but the issue will come right back if we didn't look at what was causing it in the first place. We need like medications, sometimes I can't do trauma work with someone that's super hypervigilant and dysregulated, and a medication can help the nervous system and the brain allow for the work to happen. So I couldn't just handle like everything on my own with someone trying to do trauma work. It takes a care team. People hear the word holistic and think like woo woo. It really, and I'm glad that it's more of a thing to look at the word trauma. When I started doing trauma work, it wasn't talked about too much, and now
it's so trendy.
Yeah. But the word integrative, holistic, but just to get the message out there, it means looking at you as a whole person, and whatever that looks like. Medical doctors, we need them, but we need them to look at the whole part. I can't tell you how many times, like, I get people that have done all kinds of stuff medical wise, and then they come to me because they couldn't figure it out, and they told me to go see a therapist.
Yeah. And unfortunately, sometimes if that's not conveyed with nuance and, a lot of, just compassion and skill, people can hear, they think this is all in my head. Right. When in reality, we know, like you said, the brain is literally part of the body. It's not, you can't separate it. And then all those things, lifestyle, environmental factors, like all of those are impacting your nervous system. The trauma we're holding is impacting that. And so it's got to be the both and. But, I want to say too that, what you mentioned about holistic, I agree with. In theory, I think that is what that word should mean is, whole person. And we're going to look at whatever is needed from any kind of approach. And I just caution people, just like if you're, you're working with some kind of practitioner who's only using CBT because it's evidence-based, like you're probably going to be limited in what you're getting. And similarly, like if you're working with someone who calls themselves holistic, but is only using sort of spiritual energy, new age kind of stuff, and they are anti sort of Western medicine, like be wary, right? Because some people use that term and they are not necessarily operating from what is in, I mean, they're not trying to do harm, but I just think if they're really against the sort of Western medicine approach, I'm not going to send anyone to them.
It's the opposite. It's the the polarizing side, whether, I mean, with the help stuff, to say you can't, like, don't go to regular doctors.
Right. Or psychiatrists. Yeah.
You're on the other side of the medical side saying, don't do the holistic stuff. yeah, I'd like, good point there.
Yeah.
It is with anything, we go to the extreme sides of
Yeah,
things.
and terminology means different things to different people. So it's like
Mhm.
that is not a bad word. It's a great word. And some people might be using it in ways that like maybe,
Yeah.
caution. Caution is
Mhm.
advised. But like you said, you're the expert in you. So always work with practitioners who are treating you that way.
Yes.
If they're not, then run the other direction. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
well, this has been so much fun. I could keep talking forever, but we'll schedule another time to catch up on things and tell the people what how they can connect with you, how to find you, knowing, some people are local, some people are not.
Yes, I am Trauma Therapy of Nashville. On the web and any social media, it's just Trauma Therapy Nashville. So,
Cool.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this. It's been so much fun and we'll talk soon.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you feel moved to share it with someone you think would love it, or maybe leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I would be ridiculously appreciative. If you or someone you know has an interesting and inspiring story about change, please reach out and let me know. You can send any interview recommendations to creaturesofchangepodcast@gmail.com. For show notes for this and previous episodes, head over to GaiaCenter.co/podcast. That's GAIAcenter.co/podcast, where you can also check out our sister podcast, Bodyful. You can connect with me on Instagram at Val K. Martin, that's K-A-Y spelled out, and at the Gaia Center, which is the name of my Nashville-based therapy practice. You can also sign up for the Gaia Center monthly newsletter at bit.ly/Gaia Center News, where we'll share about groups and events we're offering locally, along with tips and resources from our therapists that we hope will be valuable and relevant wherever you may be listening from. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.